Okay. Thank you all that's been here. We're just gonna have a few more minutes for folks that are still logging in, and then we'll be ready to begin. Thank you all. Hey, good evening. Welcome to one of APSA's interactive sessions in collaboration with the Association of American Medical Colleges. We are pleased to host tonight's session with faculty to answer general questions about physician scientist training programs. I'd now like to have our wonderful panelists go around and introduce themselves, including their current institutions. To be efficient, I'll call on you by name. Dr. Tiffany Scharschmidt.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Tiffany Scharschmidt. I'm a professor of dermatology at UCSF, a clinician there, and run a research lab in microbiology and immunology.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scharschmidt. And next, Dr. Michael Linnaeus.
Hi, everybody. I am a physician scientist at the University of Washington in Seattle and an associate program director for the internal medicine residency.
Thank you, sir. And Dr. Terence Gade. We can't hear you yet, Dr. Gade. Not yet. If it's okay, Dr. Gade, while we wait, we'll have Dr.
that?
Oh, great. Yes, please, sir.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right.
I'm Terence Gade. I'm Associate Professor of Radiology and Cancer Biology at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm also the co-director of our P32-funded Radiology Research Track residency and a clinician scientist focused on image-guided interventions for cancer.
Thank you, Dr. Gade. We're happy to have you here. Dr. Manoj Menon, please.
Hi, my name is Manoj Menon. I'm an associate professor of medicine in the Division of Hematology and Medical Oncology at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center and the University of Washington, and serve as the program director for the Hematology and Medical Oncology Fellowship here.
That's great, and we're happy to have you here tonight, Dr. Menon. To the panelists, I must say thank you all for being here, and we're grateful you took the time off of your day to come virtually to our meeting to provide your wisdom and powers to folks thinking about PSTPs. My name is Tim Hadawale. I'll be your moderator for the evening. I'm a 6th-year MD PhD student at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, South Carolina. And in the chat box, also helping us to moderate will be Bree Brammer, as well as Emily Conlevon and Kerry Davidson, who are also helping to volunteer our live tweeting of this event. For those of you who are going to have to step away or miss a piece of this event, as a reminder, we're making it recorded and you could access it as it is going to be publicly available afterwards. As the moderator, I'll remind you to please submit your questions to the Q&A box. We have already received those submitted during the registration process, and it's a lot of them. And we have a team of co-moderators behind the scenes helping to collect questions live as we go along. So please submit the questions through the chat box. And that's all the announcements that I have for now. Thank you all for being here. And I'm going to go ahead and start with a short presentation by Dr. Tiffany Sharp-Schmidt, who has a very informative set of slides that she has prepared for us. Other guests or panelists, you do not have to make any presentation, but we're going to have Dr. Sharp-Schmidt give us some very important and helpful tips that she's provided in her slides. Dr. Sharp-Schmidt, please.
Thank you. Let me get this to full presenter mode. This is my first time joining one of these, so thanks for having me. And I sort of adapted this from a colleague at another derm institution. So I'll keep it brief, and there's some general stuff about PSTPs, but just a little bit about derm specifically as a sort of smaller specialty that works a little bit differently. But I sort of come at this from someone who trained in a PSTP here at UCSF Derm and have now been sort of in the leadership of that and vice chair of research in our department. So just to sort of, this is, I think, pretty informational to everything we'll talk about tonight, but just to sort of introduce everyone again, as defined by the AAMC, PSTPs, or physician scientist training programs, or sort of this post-MD PhD program where we're really geared towards trying to bring those who have these dual degrees or some non-PhD scientists, sort of including myself, who are really interested in carrying forward the science of medicine into sort of formal training. And these are ideally trying to combine all those clinical training skills that you need along with the postdoctoral and scientific skills that you need to become an independent physician scientist. This was a really nice study that sort of looks globally at sort of what has been the path. This was published 5 years ago, so take that with a grain of salt, and it reflects data that was, collected prior to that. But this sort of represents sort of the breadth and breakdown of different specialties that different MD, PhD graduates specifically sort of choose. And this reflects, of course, often the size of these specialties, but there's other factors, of course, that go into it. You can see dermatology there at just about 4%, so we're not a big representation of what graduates go into. There's a lot of things that can affect, what keeps people in research or how much research they get to do when they go into their specialty time. This is, this can impact how much, procedural time you have to have versus in the lab or clinic time. I'll just point out at the right that dermatology is pretty comparable in terms of probably some other specialties represented here, internal medicine and their subspecialties or other sort of primary care, pediatrics, neurology programs in terms of sort of the amount of research that people are able to do. These probably sort of will come up in questions again today, but a really important part of sort of enabling physician scientist development is finding protected time for your research training as you train in your specialty of choice, finding support for that, both you individually and sort of programmatically. And that means kind of, getting a group of mentors that is really aware of this specific pathway of career development. And there's, I'll refer to you this, which is a published article that sort of talks about different funding mechanisms for this, but call out just on the next slide, 2 particular things that are not individual grants that a trainee would get at this step, but that are ways that we support this training at the program level. And so this would include T32 training, and these are NIH awards that institutions or specific departments within institutions that really want to make this part of their mission would apply for, the T32 and then the R38. We actually don't have any R38s in dermatology. That's influenced a little bit sometimes by what arms of the NIH offer that award. But we do have a lot of T32 supported dermatology programs. So this is a recorded slide deck. So these are some of the ones that have active T32, so NIH grants that are specifically to sort of train people in the science of dermatology. And that doesn't mean that other places won't train physician scientists, but this is just a sampling to understand what are those that have invested the time in putting forth the programs and to have the funding to help cover some of the cost of that training and pass it on to those trainees. So if for those interested in dermatology, this is something you need to sort of think about when preparing to apply for residency, because often it will be a slightly different process than a general dermatology application. That might mean sort of a separate click in the application portal, and procedurally for interviews a separate day, even often in addition to the clinical residency track. And sometimes institutions and programs do make you choose between those tracks just to sort of really help you identify and the program identify what is your desire, how much do you want to do research in your training. And these can come in different flavors. If you were to just become a dermatologist, what we have is a separate intern year, and that is a separate match process from the dermatology component. So that might be in a medicine program or pediatrics, depending on your interest, or a combined categorical one. And then 3 years of clinical training. And many programs in dermatology have adopted things that I think we borrowed from medicine and neurology and other specialties, where we try and abbreviate the clinical training by a year when possible and replace that or augment that year with more research training. So, this plus 2 years or plus 1 year of a postdoc is almost never enough for one to kind of develop into a full-fledged physician scientist ready to take on a faculty position. So many of these programs that are having these T32s and other things have found ways to make sure that we can support our physician scientist trainees extended beyond that period of time till they're ready for independence. And that's always a good thing when you're looking at programs, to ask the programs how they do that and how they help bridge some of those transitions, which can be nuanced and different. So just for our training program, what does this look like? We happen to, many of the ones in derm and I'm sure medicine as well have been doing this. It's been part of the culture of our institutions and departments. Derm is, like, as I mentioned, small. So we match just 1 or 2 research track applicants each year, and our total class for each size is just 7 or 8 residents. But we have a faculty with lots of interest in science and many different areas of expertise. But that said, we actually encourage a lot of our trainees to think outside dermatology, to do their postdocs in medicine labs and chemistry labs and other things that interest them, and to bring that back to our specialty. And a lot of this involves both individual mentoring from the moment that you hit dermatology training through that postdoc and into independence. I'll just acknowledge that we're, a department that has thought for quite a while about how we bring and value and support diversity within our specialty. And this can be at many levels: gender, race, ethnicity, geographic, scientific focus. And we have a vice chair of health equity that I meet with weekly, along with other vice chairs, to think about how we incorporate this into our research mission. So if you have any questions about that, I would be happy to take them individually offline. Just logistically, again, sort of the first 2 years, as I mentioned, is a lot of clinical, but you're thinking about what you want to do in research. And then what we do is, again, year 3, so of the dermatology training, you pretty much are fully or mostly fully in the lab, with just about a half day of clinical training. And that's the same for year 4. And as we mentioned, it often is more than a 2+2. It becomes a 2+2+. And so that's where we actually bring trainees into kind of a faculty position, at least on the clinical side, so they can keep training and continue their science till they're ready to apply for an independent position. We've been really fortunate to be able to retain a lot of people in this pathway and have success with this. And so I'm happy to take questions today as relates to dermatology or just this pathway in general. So thanks, and I hope I didn't take too much time with that.
That was great, Dr. Shashmi. That was a tour de force. Thanks so much for sharing those wonderful slides and information to our participants. I just wanted to also ask real quick if there are any other panelists among our erudite faculty who has any slides, we can accommodate that at this time as well before we proceed into the questions.
I have a couple slides that I'd be happy to share, pretty brief.
Yes, please go ahead, Dr. Gade.
Okay, are you seeing those?
Yes, we can.
Great. So thanks very much. I just wanted to share a little bit about physician scientist training programs in radiology, which is a little less of a conventional physician scientist training field. So why radiology research training? There's an urgent need for MD and MD PhD clinician scientists who can understand the scientific method, navigate the NIH and other funding agencies, apply for funding, manage research programs, and become independent investigators. And really, clinician scientists who can fill that gap between basic science and clinical practice in a heavily technology-driven field. The goals of physician scientists is generally to drive advances in approach. That includes imaging technologies and methodologies, from imaging devices, image generation, quantitative imaging methods, to imaging informatics and analytics, but also extending to more biologically driven fields such as molecular imaging and image-guided therapy. And that includes theranostics, but also interventional and image-guided interventions. Also to apply radiologic methods to basic and translational research, to the development of imaging tools like reporter methods, tools that allow us to study in vivo phenomena like metabolism and brain connectivity, leveraging machine learning and AI approaches, including radiogenomics and imaging biomarkers, and then to lead translational research in imaging and image-guided therapy. And that's really to translate a lot of these advances from the bench to the bedside. It's important to know that radiology has been growing in its research funding consistently over the past 25 years, with staying ahead of the changes in NIH funding. So you can see here that the changes in NIH in diagnostic radiology funding have been ahead of those in percent changes in total NIH funding. So just to talk about what disciplines within radiology research tend to look like, it really leverages a range of MD, PhD training disciplines, more common, including molecular biology and pharmacology, genetics, computational biology and bioinformatics, neuroscience, biochemistry, and biophysics. But there are also a number of growing fields or disciplines that are coming to radiology, and those lie in the fields of physics and engineering for device development. Data science is growing very quickly, and computer science, given the role of imaging analytics and AI applications. And then chemistry, given the growing role of molecular imaging and the need for different probes and theranostic strategies, as well as in radiochemistry. So just to briefly go over the different approaches for radiology physician scientist training programs, there are two primary pathways. One is called the Holman pathway, which I won't talk about too much tonight, but that's a pathway that's run through the American Board of Radiology, which is our governing body. And that allows designated pathways that can be pursued at any institution. And then there are dedicated radiology physician scientist program training programs like the ones that Tiffany mentioned. And there are a variety of those. Currently, there are 6 that are funded through T32 programs. They allow for dedicated spots for research-focused residents. They have a dedicated NRMP designation that you can match directly into them. And they're programs that use optimal time and DR requirements for research-focused training with dedicated research time, typically on the order of 1 to 2 years. And the programs that currently are T32 funded, the one at UCSF, along the one here at Penn, which are the oldest, that started in 2005, along with programs at UCST, Johns Hopkins, Washington University, and UT Southwestern, with additional programs that are currently under development. Just to give you a sense of what these programs look like, use the example here at Penn, where the research track is a separate match for Penn radiology residents with 3 slots per year. There's a graded approach that forms our clinical training, where you have 2 weeks of research in the first year, 4 weeks of research in the second year, 6 weeks in the third year, and that's usually the time that we encourage our research track residents to apply for funding through the Radiological Society of North America. And then the fourth year is really all of research. That ends up being 82% of your time is spent doing research, with 18% in the clinic. And then there's dedicated research training that varies based on the fellowship training you pursue, which can occur either at our institution or others. Penn radiology research track residents are guaranteed their fellowship. So while you will apply, you're guaranteed that fellowship slot here at Penn. There are many other activities integrated in our program which drive research, including the monthly research track meeting, our How to Be an Academic Radiologist program, which is a 2-week program that occurs at the end of the first year of the residency. We have a dedicated research training day called Pendergrass, where our residents get to present their research, and we invite outside speakers. And then there are regular mentor meetings with the program directors. And I've included the timeline for our research track here at the bottom, just to give you a flavor of what that looks like, highlighting the PGY 4-year, which is the dedicated research. I'm happy to take questions about that, about our program or anything else.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gade. That was very brilliant presentation about radiology and PSTP. We really appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead straight away to our questions, and I would like to hear from Dr. Linnaeus or Dr. Menon as we go along about some of the questions that have come up in this submission that we have here. I have a question here that says that other than research support, are there other important benefits that PSTPs provide that other residencies do not?
I can go ahead and answer that. I think it's particularly important in internal medicine, where we actually follow something called the ABIM research pathway, which actually adds not only the support for research, but that additional year of research training to the pathway for those interested in research careers inside of internal medicine. So to make this clear, I think it's important to look at the more traditional pathway for an internal medicine resident who is interested in a subspecialty, and then compare it to the research pathway. So in the traditional pathway, someone would pursue a 3-year categorical residency in internal medicine, and then follow that up with a subspecialty of interest. You could say in nephrology or cardiology, or 3 years of internal medicine training, and then the training in the subspecialty that was necessary for their field of interest. Usually that leads to 6 or 7 years of training in total, with a limited amount of research training during that period, depending on the specialty one was interested in. For the PSTP at the University of Washington and most other PSTPs in internal medicine, we follow that research pathway that I mentioned, whereby the internal medicine training is shortened to 2 years, and then an additional year of research training is added to the fellowship years. And Manoj can speak to more to that if he wants to at this point. But the importance of the PSTP is to add that extra year of research training along with the support that was mentioned earlier.
Thank you so much, Dr. Linnaeus. And Dr. Menon, for that question and also for this other question, I'd like to hear your perspective. Another question from one of our participants is, how are fellowship faculty involved in the PSTP interview and selection process at your institution?
Great, thank you. So for our faculty are involved in the interview process. We select faculty based on the interest of the applicant. So, and we actually as well we query the applicants to see if there are specific faculty they would like to meet. If they have specific faculty they would like to meet during the interview process, we try to pair them up with that individual faculty member. Otherwise, we identify someone who has a similar research interest or whose lab that the applicant may be a good fit in the future. Just to comment on what Michael commented on, is that our PSTP program at the University of Washington we sometimes refer to it as a short track program, but it's not really a shorter track. It's a shorter track out of residency, but the full track is at least as long, if not longer, such that for our program in hematology and oncology, oftentimes folks who are in this physician scientist track, they will choose to either subspecialize typically in either hematology or oncology rather than receive dual board training. But their option is to do dual board training as well in both hematology and oncology. But what that looks like is that after 2 years of internal medicine residency training, they then do either 12 additional months in one of the fields in either hematology or oncology, or should they choose to want to do double boarding, they would do 18 months of clinical work in both hematology and oncology. That would give them board eligibility to sit for both of those. And then folks who are on the PSTP program would receive 3 years of research funding via a T32 mechanism. I will just add one thing about the T32 mechanism, which is somewhat of an issue, and it relates to one of the questions that I just briefly saw, is that because it's an NIH T32 mechanism, we unfortunately are unable to accept folks who are visa holders. You have to be either a green card holder, a permanent resident, or a US citizen. And that's not the rules of the individual institutions, but that is a NIH rule, unfortunately.
Thank you for answering that question. That was going to be my next question. And Dr. Shashmit and Dr. Gade and every panelist, please feel free to weigh in any of these questions as we proceed. So the offshoot from that question that Dr. Mena has answered is then that what strategies are program directors using to balance this this difficulty of or potential difficulty of IMGs from accessing research opportunities as PSTPs, for example? What strategies are program directors using to balance this and create opportunities for IMGs? And this questioner said that they, as an IMG physician scientist and prospective applicant, wonder if PSTPs would be a realistic goal for them.
And speak to just, I mean, my perspective. I think you're right that for sort of to be on a T32, then there's sort of requirements around residency and citizenship. We don't have any rules about that in terms of our PSTP program. So obviously we invest a lot in these, trainees beyond what we do for the T32 supported salary. So we certainly would consider IMGs in our application process if they have, on an equal level. And we would have to consider that would mean using departmental funds as opposed to the T32 fund for those 2 years to help support part of the salary. But we are putting a lot of non-NIH dollars into support of these applicants as well. So I think it really is more just a matter of sort of, looking at the extent of your research and your clinical skills. And if that is a good match for these programs, then the IMG status, I think, might be department and program dependent, but shouldn't be a barrier to all said programs.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. I think that the fellowships at the University of Washington are largely funded by T32 mechanisms, which are going to exclude IMGs that have not obtained permanent residency or citizenship. So, however, that may be different amongst institutions. And so I think you'll need to be very careful about selecting where to apply to with respect to that T32 funding.
Yeah, and I think we have a similar situation at Penn, but where the T32 will not support IMGs. However, the American Board of Radiology, through the Holman pathway that I mentioned, does open that possibility. While it does not support directly the funding, it does allow anybody from any institution to apply to be a Holman pathway resident, which works with those programs to develop or to sort of codify a research program for which the resident will receive a certificate for having completed it, but that are supported by the institutions themselves. So a lot of programs have chosen to go that pathway to support IMGs.
And just to clarify the distinction, though, between an IMG and a person for us anyway, could be an international medical graduate, but be a US citizen or a green card holder, and they would be eligible. So it's not where they graduated from medical school per se, it's their residency status.
That's a good point. That's right.
Yeah, that's a great point, that your residency or citizenship status makes the difference. Thank you so much for those answers. The next question is, regarding the structure of internal medicine PSTPs, does that mean that acceptance to a PSTP indicates commitment to and acceptance to the subspecialty fellowship of interest?
So I can speak to the University of Washington. The answer to this is yes. Other institutions I know have similar practices. I can't speak to them, but at the UW, what we offer is acceptance to the PSTP. Then will mean that you will be ranked to match into the fellowship that you're interested in at the time of your application.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Shashmit, is that the same at your institution?
We don't have fellowships within dermatology, so it's a little different question for us. So there's not a link. There are some, but they're separate from it, and you're just matching into dermatology residency.
Thank you so much for that. And Dr. Gade, would that be the same at your institution?
Sorry, my was cut out with the last part of the question. Can you repeat it for me?
Absolutely. That if you accept a PSTP as an internal medicine applicant, does that mean that you're committed to the subspecialty of fellowship of interest? So does that mean that you have to pursue fellowship as well, or the institution is not binding on you to continue that?
As well, it's not binding. There's no requirement to pursue fellowship. You can complete your training at the end of your residency and not go on to fellowship.
Mhm. Thank you so much. And the next question that really relates to that is that how do you manage applying for both IM categorical and IM PSTP programs? Does this require more applications or spending? And can research-focused applications impact the IM categorical application negatively?
I can speak to that, having reviewed applications for both the categorical track at the university and the PSTPs. The programs each have different they each have different missions. So the categorical track has a certain mission to select a group of residents that fit their mission, whereas the PSTP has one separate. And so the applications are reviewed differently, and they are separate from each other. In general, the folks who are going to receive serious consideration for the PSTP are those who have substantial research accomplishments. In many cases, this is a PhD. Not always, though. Substantial research accomplishments could include publications, time in the lab, a lot of work in the lab. Whereas in a categorical track, then a lot of other things are going to be considered in addition to research accomplishments, such as one's commitment to service or education or career interests in general in the community that you're applying to. So I hope that answers the question. They are different programs. It doesn't to apply to the categorical track at the University of Washington does not negatively predispose the PSTP to your application, but they are reviewed differently.
Thank you, Dr. Linnaeus, for that response. Do we have any other contribution to this question?
I address this a little bit in ours. It differs a little bit based on each dermatology program. Some you're able to apply to both in parallel, kind of a research path or the main clinical. In some instances, like ours, at least our current policy is that an applicant can apply to one or the other, but not both.
That's great.
For our program in radiology, you can apply to both, and you can rank both individually, and just based on your preference, you'll get selected for one versus the other, with different criteria for the assessment of each, of course.
Thank you very much for those responses. Another question that we have from our participant is that does it hurt your high-end categorical application to have it focused on research while applying for IM categorical? I think that's kind of partially answered in the previous question, that it might be better to have it focused still as categorical and make sure that you apply with that, with understanding that. And also another question is, are your chances of matching PSTP poor without a forced auto publication?
I don't know if they're poor, but the competition for the PSTP program is pretty, it's very competitive. And so you're competing against folks who do have first author publications. So I think it would be in one's best interest, I think, to be more competitive by having that, but it's not a mandatory part of the process.
That's great to know. Thank you. We'll go right on to the next question in the interest of time. How can PhD students maximize their chances of admission to a PSTP program, and how should they prioritize publications on their ERAS application, such as journal reputation, relevance to the specialty, clinical versus basic science research?
So I think that research productivity in general is going to be key when evaluating candidates for a PSTP program. And the specific type of research is going to depend on the institution and the type of research that is research trainees that are desired by that institution. So you may get different answers depending on where you're applying. At the University of Washington, we are looking at folks who have basic science publications primarily, less so than clinical science, clinical research publications, though that could be distinct at different locations. And in general, the publications that have the most effort put in forth by you, meaning first author publications that were driven primarily by you, are going to be of the highest value.
Thank you, Dr. Linnaeus. Going further into questions relating to the pre-application grades or lab publications, I have a question here about USMLE Step 1. It says, if an applicant has failed USMLE Step 1 once, are they automatically screened out, or can research clinical performance USMLE Step 2 etc. change their fate?
I would just say we perform a holistic review, so we don't have any screen out components for ours. I'd say that clinical performance is important, though, in consideration also for the PSTP side of things. So, I mean, overall clinical performance would be evaluated, and we specifically are not looking at USMLE scores at the moment.
We're very similar at the university. We have a holistic review at the UW. No one would get screened out for a failed Step 1, but the clinical side of the application is reviewed as well as the research productivity, even though the research productivity is the primary focus.
We have a similar process that's holistic. I'd say that we've found at our program, we're weighting the clinical aspect equally to the research productivity and the research emphasis, just because of the nature of the residency, but it is a holistic process.
Thank you, Dr. Cade, and thank you, Dr. Linnaeus. Another question that I have here is, what should I look for in a program? Should I reach out directly to a program? If it is not clear who runs the PSTP, should I reach out to the residency program director?
I'm sorry, Tim, I didn't hear that well. Could you repeat it?
It says, what should I look for in a program? Should I reach out directly to a program? If it is not clear who runs the PSTP, should I reach out to the residency program director?
Yeah, I think reaching out directly to the director, if you can identify them, is the most direct route. But reaching out to program directors, they'll be happy to direct you to the appropriate people, I'm sure, for most every program.
Thank you. Thanks for that answer, Dr. Cade. Another question here is, as a student in the graduate phase, what are things I could do to be a strong applicant?
So I can say something there. That we talked a little bit about the research productivity, including first author publications, as being a key part of the application for PSTPs in internal medicine. The other key parts of it are going to be things like your personal statement. We're interested in training people who have a strong interest in research as a part of their career, with the goal of ultimately having them join the faculty, for example, at the university following successful fellowship training. And so we want to hear that people have both thought about their future career in research and thought even a little bit about what that might look like and how the university might be able to support them as they go along that pathway. Additionally, having some experiences that show your commitment to research, as well as your commitment to clinical training in the subspecialty that you're interested in would be good factors.
The one thing to add to that is the letter of the research mentor. I think that carries a lot of weight, both based on the productivity and the synopsis of what the applicant has achieved during their time.
And just to echo that, I think the research letters for us are very informative in general. The letter from the mentor and beyond play a big role in our evaluation.
Thank you all for those responses. And the next question I have, but before I get into the next question, just wanted to provide a reminder that this session is being recorded, and a team of co-moderators are gathering submitted questions, which is where I'm pulling from. And these questions come from the registration link and in real time, the chat box, Twitter, and also from emails to chairs and co-chair of the virtual content committee. Now, my next question is this. What metrics of success do you look at, or should I ask about, when comparing PSTPs? Specifically for IM, how are programs considering signals, geographical preferences, and hometown when evaluating applicants? What would be your advice to someone who truly does not have a geographic preference?
I think, we're still learning about the signals at the University of Washington. Really, you have to signal with either a gold or silver to be considered for either the categorical program, the primary care program, or the physician scientist training program. So that is weighed. Fellowship programs don't yet have such a mechanism. We do have a geographic preference that we can identify, where an applicant can identify up to 3 regions geographically that they prefer. And so we are using that. In next year, we think we will have access to a geographic signal as well.
I'll say that at the University of Washington, I think many schools on the West Coast, the geographic preference has historically not been that helpful to us, because many people will select the West Coast as a region, which is such a large region, that it has not been a very good signal for us to identify folks who are really interested in coming to Seattle. The signaling has changed that quite a great deal. So of those two, we weight the signaling a great deal more than we do the geographic preference, which is often too broad to be helpful.
We've used the same, the signaling has been immensely helpful for us. And then secondarily, the geographic reference, which is somewhat helpful to us. I think for people who truly don't have a preference for location, there is an opportunity to indicate that in your application. And certainly, given that we're providing a holistic review, we're able to see that and to evaluate that.
I appreciate all.
We're still figuring it out. We're not sort of weighting gold definitely from silver at this point, but we are sort of just taking note about who is signaling us.
There was a question as well about the ways to measure success for a PSTP program. I'll just point you to Dr. Scharschmidt's slides when she started. She gave really nice information about how to evaluate programs, including how many graduates are going on to receive K awards and faculty positions, and ultimately remaining in the pipeline of physician scientists. I think that is a real key piece of information.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. My next question here is, are PSTP programs generally able to support public health or other social science research if they have an interest and the right faculty?
So in internal medicine, that's going to be dependent on the institution. I think in some areas you will find that there are folks who are enthusiastic about training people with those types of research interests, whereas others not. I think you're going to have to get pretty granular in looking at programs with those long-term interests.
I'd say that's true for radiology as well. I think there is a growing interest in supporting research residents in those areas. But I think it does depend on the expertise at the institution and the environment.
Answer here.
Thank you all for providing your perspectives from your respective institutions. And the next question I have is PSTP appropriate if you're not interested in subspecializing clinically? And the questioner says, I am considering working as a hospitalist for my clinical time.
I can speak for the University of Washington that would not be an appropriate career pathway. The PSTP is focused on folks who are pursuing a subspecialty at this time at the university. I think that's the case for most internal medicine programs throughout the country. And for those who are interested in a career as a hospitalist, then a categorical track residency would probably be the best place to apply at this point.
Thank you for that. And this questioner would like to know if a fast track or research track residency will detract from the ability to hone clinical skills.
I can speak to that again from the internal medicine residency at the University of Washington. The answer to that is unfortunately yes. You're missing a year of internal medicine training in order to prioritize other aspects of your career, which for most of the people on this call will be pursuing research. So that is a year that will ultimately come back to you in other ways and will be used in a way that will help you further your career. Though there's no way to get around, you're receiving 1 year less of training. I'll tell you that at the university, our fast trackers have not had trouble clinically in things like the clinical parts of their fellowship over the years that we've had fast trackers. So I think for most of the people who pursue this pathway, they're clinically strong enough to be able to miss that year and still be able to sit for the boards for internal medicine and practice in their desired subspecialty. But certainly there is less internal medicine training in the ABIM research pathway and the PSTP.
And I would just add that for folks who are interested in more clinical research careers as part of this path, for us at the University of Washington and the Fred Hutch, that would be a less desirable track, the PSTP, for someone who's interested in more of a clinical research track. We feel like folks who are interested in clinical research would benefit from the 3rd year of internal medicine residency. We would prioritize folks in this track who are interested in a lab-based career.
That's great to know. And moving it right along, I think this is a very interesting question, and it's related to the subject of our next webinar, which will be on the 19th of December. And that's that, did anyone on the panel do a PSTP program with a family? Are the hours any better than a non-research residency?
I did my PSTP program with a family and a spouse who's also in medicine and was in later stages of training and then pursuing her career. The hours were not better, that's for sure. I felt like, I think the demands of a PSTP are significant. You're trying to become the best clinician you can become, but also to develop yourself as a researcher. And so I actually found myself spending a little more time at the hospital and in the lab, trying to achieve both. So I wouldn't say the hours are any better. I think in your dedicated research year, at least for radiology, your time is your own in many ways, and so there is a little more flexibility. But I certainly wouldn't say that the hours are better.
At the UW, I would echo that. Our 2 years of internal medicine training are identical to those pursued for those in the categorical track. So you are deep in intern year and resident year at that time, and so the schedule is very similar to what you might expect from a traditional residency. And then the same goes for when you enter the clinical years of the fellowship. Although there is some flexibility with your hours when you get to the end of your fellowship and are doing more research training. That's really your time at which you need to be as productive as possible in order to launch your career.
And there's a very great...
There's not any less time. That said, I'd say like the majority of our recent PSTP trainees have entered residency with kids or have had them on the way, and that's inclusive of both childbearing and non-childbearing individuals. So you do what is right for you.
This is very vital to know, and thanks so much for sharing on that. And now this is a very much question that deals with the personal reasons why you've decided to become a physician scientist. So this question asks, when in your training did you decide to pursue a PSTP?
So I did not pursue a PSTP. I did a categorical track internal medicine residency, and then I decided in the 3rd year of that residency that I wanted to become a physician scientist. I had done a PhD before residency, and so I'd always wanted to have research questions in my year, but didn't have the fully formed pathway until the end of my medicine training. I did not enter a PSTP.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, Dr. Linnaeus.
I actually I weighed both more clinical tracks and PSTPs pretty heavily. I was interested in interventional radiology at a time before there were many dedicated IR tracks. So I was definitely concerned about my clinical training and getting the kind of training I thought would be important to be a clinician scientist, especially in the clinic. And I really recognized that these programs were critical in terms of launching your clinician scientist career. And so it was at that point that I realized I really needed to be productive in those years and try to develop a research program in order to realize my goal of becoming a clinician scientist. And that's sort of, for me, how the track went. But it's certainly a very personal decision. And there are many ways to achieve the goal of becoming a clinician scientist. It's not the only one.
Thanks for sharing, Dr. Gade. Do we have any other comments from our panelists about when you decided to be a physician scientist? Dr. Menon, do you have any suggestions or anything to add to this?
So like Michael, I was not on the PSTP track. I did residency, took a little detour for a bit, went back to fellowship training. And as part of our fellowship training, which I did here at the Fred Hutch, we are on a T32 for 2 years. So we had protected time to do that. And that sort of launched or helped start me on the path. But I wasn't in a PSTP program.
That's great to know. Thank you, sir. And my next question as we begin to wrap up this webinar is, how do you pivot if you match to an IM categorical program without PSTP?
I can speak to that. For most IM programs, there will be the opportunity, or for many IM programs, there will be the opportunity to pursue what you might call a traditional short tracking pathway. And so one should speak to the program director as soon as possible if that's a desired route. In this route, you would then apply for your subspecialty fellowship at the end of your R1 year to then pursue the ABIM research pathway that we are formalizing within the PSTP. The differences there between the traditional short tracking pathway and the PSTP are that there's no guarantee from the local program that you're going to match into the fellowship of interest, and there is with the PSTP. So it would be a competitive process to enter the fellowship at that stage. It could result in you either not matching or going to a different program. So that's hopefully that answers your question. The other thing to consider would be completing the full 3-year categorical residency if that's something that met your career best at that stage.
And just to add to that, we are careful with the use of guarantee spot, even in the PSTP, as per ABIM rules. They are typically ranked to match, but if there were situations during residency that came up that the applicant wasn't performing clinically or for other reasons, that would not be held. Similarly, the applicant themselves could choose to go elsewhere. They're not bound by the institution's PSTPs. So that applicant, if they start at the University of Washington on this track, they could apply for fellowship during that same time period and end up elsewhere.
Thank you, Dr. Menon. I actually would like to also follow up on that response. Like, what would you say is the advantage or disadvantage to choosing a PSTP that guarantees a fellowship compared to one that gives you the freedom of going elsewhere for your fellowship?
I think, as Michael mentioned, I think it is nice to have some level of confidence that you will continue your training in the same location. It can help initiate research projects prior to the initiation of fellowship, meeting contacts in those places. And then importantly, I think you develop a social network in that area, in that city, that you're going to be for a prolonged period of time. And I think there was a question in the chat about folks post-training, do they stay at their institution? And many folks do stay in their institution or in the surrounding area at a different institution, if there are more institutions in that one city. And so I think it is something to think about, like, is this a place that you want to be for a prolonged period of time? Do you see yourself being happy there? But we do have plenty of folks who also apply through the more traditional research pathway, where they apply to fellowship after their their second year or after their first year into their second year. And that's an option as well. But both give you flexibility. I mean, I think that folks who, even if they enroll in the PSTP program and find that they are not happy there for whatever reason, social reasons or the climate of the program or the city or whatever, they're not bound by that. They can choose to go elsewhere.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very insightful. And I think that that's been a burning question for a lot of our listeners as well. I have another question from the chat box. For each of your programs, could you share a ballpark of how many applications you receive, how many you seriously consider for rank to match, and how many people join each year? I think Dr. Menon, if you would like to continue that as well, while you highlighted.
I think Mike can better answer the question in terms of the PSTP program than I can.
Yeah.
He gets the full synopsis.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Linnaeus.
Yeah, so for our PSTP program, we received about 90 applications this year for 2 slots. We seriously considered 75 of those applications, and we are interviewing 20 people for those 2 slots. We have considered, obviously, that with a great deal, and that's what we think is best for both the applicants coming to our program as well as our program.
Okay. Thank you for sharing your insights from UW. Do we have from UPenn and from UCSF?
For dermatology, so I'm not speaking internal medicine at UCSF, we get 40 to 50 applications, interview about 10 to 12, and match 1 to 2.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Schmidt.
We have similar numbers, about 40, 50 applications. We're interviewing 15 to 20, and then we're matching 3 spots per year. And that's across, across the IR and the IR, DR, and the DR programs.
Got it. Thanks so much. And my next question is, are away rotations required or recommended for PSTPs? I think that's a great question now for folks in the 3rd year of the medicine junior clerkship.
I would say the majority of the applicants we get have not done rotations with us, and there's a lot to do in an MD PhD degree, and to fit that in, I think if there's, I think if it's something that the applicant really wants to explore a program, it's a great option. But it's certainly not something that's required in any way. I think if you feel like you have a strong clinical background and a good rationale for going to that school and it being a good fit, then, it's not a big square one way or the other.
Dr. Linnaeus, if you don't mind, is there any specific role that you think this plays to apply to your institution?
No, out of the folks who have applied and been accepted here, no one in recent memory has done an away rotation. I think it's very difficult to fit into the training, just as Dr. Scharspit mentioned. It's certainly not a requirement.
And Dr. Gade, how about you, Payne?
I'd say the same is true. It's not a requirement. The majority of the residents we match have not rotated with us. I'd say that I have seen residents or applicants who, interestingly, may not have signaled us, have expanded their portfolio by rotating in places they didn't signal. So that has been one strategy I've noticed, but it's certainly not.
And to piggyback on that, Dr. Gade, if a person chooses to rotate in another institution, does that maybe improve their, like in the broad spectrum of the application package? Does that improve the chances? Does that add to the worth of the package of the applicant?
You're saying if they did decide to rotate with us, does that improve their application?
Right. And also if they rotated at other institutions of maybe similar standing or very high ranking institutions as well.
Yeah. The second part, rotating at other institutions doesn't inform our decision. I noticed that that is sometimes that can be useful because you can get recommendations from those institutions, and depending on what those look like, those can be certainly useful. I think for us, Strong performance, if you do rotate with us, definitely does get factored in, and obviously getting to know you and your interests and how they dovetail with the program can be helpful.
Okay.
I
And
feel
thank
like
you
Tim,
very much.
I should add one thing. For the University of Washington, specific to international medical graduates, we do ask for 2 months of rotations within the United States to be considered for application to the residency. So they don't have to be at the UW, but for folks who are IMGs, we do ask for some rotations within the country in order to be considered for the residency.
That's great to know. And thank you all very much for those very insightful information. I've personally enjoyed it myself as a third year, thinking of a PSTP as I begin to look towards the future. And as we wrap up tonight, I want to thank you all for joining us for our Q&A session today. And I want to thank our panelists so much for their time and the participants who made this session so interactive, and so many people who have helped to make today a success: the public relations team, the partnerships committees, the APSA leadership, both at the student level as well as the national leaders. Thank you all very much. Our next interactive session is going to be on December 19th. It's titled Labs, Lectures, and Little Ones: Balancing Family and MD PhD Life. And this will be unrecorded to allow for discussion. So feel free to come, and more information will be found on our website at www.physicianscientist.org/page/interactive-sessions. And I think that's posted in the chat box as well for us. And so thank you all very much, and have a wonderful rest of your day and a good evening.
Tim, if you'll keep this open for a second, I can answer some of these questions in the chat. I couldn't get to them while I was listening. Give me a few seconds so I can get to some of them.
Yes, Dr. Linnaeus, please go ahead.